The company cafeteria buzzed with polished conversations, executives in tailored suits laughing over gourmet meals, the clatter of silver cutlery echoing against glass walls. Amidst the bustle sat a solitary figure, the janitor, hunched slightly over a modest tin lunchbox. Inside lay a simple sandwich and an apple, nothing like the plated feast surrounding him. A group of younger employees at the next table snickered. "Look at that, still eating like it's high school," one muttered, loud enough to sting. Another smirked, "No wonder he's stuck cleaning floors." Their laughter rippled, cruel and careless, yet the janitor's expression did not waver. He chewed slowly, eyes steady, as though used to the sting of ridicule. Unseen by the crowd, a woman had just entered the CEO. From the doorway, she caught the moment. The laughter, the humiliation, the quiet dignity. Irritation flickered in her eyes. From the polished glass doors, she paused. The cafeteria was a familiar scene she rarely lingered in, employees clustered in neat little tribes, conversations orbiting around quarterly numbers and office gossip. Yet today, her attention was pulled not to the confident laughter of executives, but to the subtle, almost invisible man in the corner. The janitor. She watched as he lifted his sandwich with a deliberate calm, ignoring the mockery circling around him. His uniform bore faint stains that never quite came out, his shoes scuffed from years of use. But it wasn't his poverty that unsettled her. It was his stillness, his refusal to shrink or defend himself. And then she noticed his eyes. Something in the way they held their ground, unflinching yet weary, struck a chord she couldn't explain. It wasn't the gaze of a stranger. It was a window to a memory buried under decades of boardrooms, mergers, and accolades. A whisper of a time when her world was small, when success wasn't measured in profits, but in the safety of a friend's laughter. Her chest tightened. In her mind, she saw flashes. A boy standing beside a swing set, pushing her higher when older kids tried to shove her off. The sound of cicadas droning in the summer heat. Chalk dust on their hands as they scrawled dreams onto a cracked school blackboard. And that smile, protective, unpretentious, brimming with a kindness she had leaned on more times than she could count. She blinked hard, the cafeteria coming back into focus. The boy she remembered was gone. In his place sat a janitor mocked for his simplicity. It seemed impossible, and yet. Could it be him? The CEO straightened her blazer, forcing composure back into her frame. This wasn't the place for daydreams, and yet the unease refused to fade. Why had his eyes pulled her so sharply into the past? Why did the sound of laughter around him now feel so hollow, so cruel? She tapped her nails lightly against the folder in her hand, trying to steady herself. Rationally, it could not be him. After all, people change, lives diverge, memories blur. But the thought refused to loosen its grip. The way he endured the ridicule without a trace of bitterness. It reminded her too much of someone who once told her, "Don't cry, you're stronger than they think." Her gaze lingered longer than she intended. She shook herself, moving toward the elevators, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. But in the silence of her private office minutes later, the images returned with relentless clarity. The boy with chalk-stained hands, the oak tree where promises were whispered, the laughter that had once made her believe the world could be kind. She exhaled slowly, pushing her chair back. Whether coincidence or fate, she had to know. The decision began to form. Tomorrow, she would learn who this janitor really was. The memory unfolded in her mind with the clarity of sunlight breaking through clouds. Suddenly, she was no longer the CEO in polished heels and a sharp suit. She was a little girl again, her shoes scuffed, her school uniform one size too large because her mother couldn't afford new ones each year. The world was smaller then. The schoolyard stretched endlessly, dust kicking up under the feet of running children. The rusted swings creaked in rhythm with the cicadas humming in the summer heat. Lunch breaks were filled with chatter, games, and sometimes cruelty. That was where she first saw him. A boy with hair that always seemed slightly tousled, carrying a lunch that was hardly more plentiful than her own. Yet what he had, he shared without hesitation. On the first day, when she sat alone beneath the shade of the oak tree, head bent low so no one would see her watery eyes, he appeared. "You can sit with me," he said, holding out half of his sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, the bread slightly crushed. She hesitated, embarrassed. "I don't want to take your food." He shrugged, smiling in that way only children can, pure and uncalculated. "Friends share. Besides, I like it better this way. Half for me, half for you." From that day forward, the oak tree became theirs. It was their refuge when bullies prowled the yard, mocking her for her patched shoes or for raising her hand too eagerly in class. He would step forward, not with fists or anger, but with words that cut through cruelty. "Leave her alone," he'd say simply, and there was something in his voice that made even the older boys hesitate. Once, when she came to school with tears still fresh from an argument at home, he quietly pushed a small drawing across the desk toward her, a stick figure of her, smiling, holding hands with another stick figure labeled me. Beneath it, in crooked letters, he had scrawled, "Don't worry, you're not alone." She kept that scrap of paper for years, folded carefully inside her notebooks until the edges wore thin. They dreamed together too, as children always do. Lying in the grass beneath the oak, they stared up at drifting clouds. She whispered her secret wish, to grow up and build something bigger than herself, something lasting. He grinned, pointing to the sky. "You will. You're the smartest person I know. When you're a big boss one day, don't forget me." She laughed, brushing him with a fallen oak leaf. "Don't be silly. We'll always be friends, no matter what." Their bond wasn't dramatic, but it was unbreakable. Shared sandwiches, shared secrets, the small, ordinary kindnesses that root deeply in the heart. He never made her feel poor, never made her feel less. With him, she was simply herself, and that was enough. The years blurred forward. Middle school brought new friends, new challenges. Life tugged them in different directions. Her family moved across town when her father found steadier work. Promises of "we'll always meet under the oak" began to fade beneath the weight of exams, responsibilities, and the relentless march of time. Yet even as she grew older, pursuing scholarships, clawing her way into universities and later boardrooms, the memory of him never left. Whenever she doubted herself, she would hear his voice. "You're the smartest person I know." Whenever loneliness crept in, she remembered his crooked drawing and those words, "You're not alone." Back in the present, the echo of those memories hit her like a storm. The janitor in the cafeteria, mocked for his plain lunch, carried the same steady gaze, the same quiet dignity. She had buried that chapter of her childhood under decades of ambition, but now it rose to the surface with undeniable force. Could it truly be him? Her throat tightened, and for the first time in years, she felt the vulnerability of that little girl beneath the oak tree. The CEO who had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and faced down rival corporations now found herself shaken by the simplest of questions. Had she just seen her oldest friend? She pressed a hand to her temple, steadying her breath. Logic urged her to dismiss it as coincidence. People resembled one another all the time, but her heart whispered differently. The memories were too sharp, the feeling too strong. And so, as the city skyline stretched beyond her office window, she resolved quietly. She had to know. The truth would not let her rest until she did. When the laughter in the cafeteria faded into the background, the janitor rose quietly, collecting his empty lunchbox with the same patience he carried through every day. He didn't move quickly, nor did he linger. His steps were measured, steady, as though every stride was its own quiet act of defiance. He would not let their mockery break him. The truth of his life, however, was far heavier than anyone in that room cared to imagine. Years earlier, he had run a modest repair shop, a little corner business that kept the neighborhood's appliances alive and humming. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his. Customers knew him by name, trusted his honesty, and paid what they could. For a while, it was enough, until the economy shifted, until larger chains swallowed the smaller shops whole. Debts grew. Medical bills piled on when his wife fell ill. By the time he closed the doors to his shop, he had nothing left but the weight of responsibility and the determination not to collapse under it. Cleaning floors wasn't his dream, but it was honest work. It kept his children clothed, kept the lights on, kept food, however simple, on the table. The lunchbox in his hand told its own story. A plain sandwich, an apple, sometimes leftover rice and beans. He never indulged in cafeteria meals, not because he didn't want to, but because every saved dollar meant another pack of crayons for his daughter's school, another textbook for his son. His children came first, always. There were nights he went hungry so that they didn't. Yet when his kids looked at him, they never saw deprivation. They saw a father who smiled at their drawings, who clapped at their school plays, who told them stories about oak trees and promises of a better tomorrow. And so, when coworkers snickered at his simple lunch, he never lashed out. He held himself with quiet dignity because he knew what they didn't, that the truest measure of a man isn't the richness of his meal, but the sacrifices he makes in silence. Still, their laughter stung. It wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last. He endured it the way he endured everything, quietly, patiently, with a resilience that came from years of weathering storms. But on this particular day, something shifted. Though he didn't notice, the CEO's eyes had followed him from the cafeteria to the hallway. She had seen the mockery, had seen the composure in the face of cruelty, and something within her stirred. She couldn't shake the nagging familiarity. She couldn't let go of the echo of that boy beneath the oak tree. For the first time in a long while, the janitor's silent struggles would no longer remain invisible. That night, long after most of the office lights had dimmed, the CEO sat alone in her glass-walled office. The city below shimmered in 1,000 fragments of neon and headlamps, but her gaze wasn't on the skyline. It lingered on memory. The janitor's face kept surfacing in her mind, the curve of his jaw, the unwavering steadiness in his eyes. She tried to push it aside, to drown in emails and quarterly projections, but the effort failed. The harder she worked, the louder the echoes grew. The sound of laughter under an oak tree, a boy's voice saying, "You're not alone." Her polished hands, adorned with rings that spoke of power, clenched into fists on her desk. She needed to know. The next morning, under the guise of reviewing internal operations, she summoned HR. The manager arrived briskly, holding a tablet, ready to rattle off numbers and turn over reports. But she cut through the formalities with uncharacteristic directness. "There's a janitor here. Quiet man, works the midday shift. I need his file." The HR manager blinked, surprised. "Of course, may I ask why?" Her tone sharpened. "Just bring it." Minutes later, a slim folder slid across her desk. She dismissed the manager with a wave, her pulse quickening as she opened it. There it was, his name. Her breath caught, the room seemed to tilt. It was him. The boy from the oak tree, the one who had once halved his sandwich so she wouldn't go hungry. The one who stood in front of bullies twice his size without flinching. The one who had told her she was stronger than she believed. Her polished facade cracked as her fingers trembled on the page. She skimmed the file, employment history, address, emergency contacts. It all felt clinical, reducing a life to lines of data. But every word struck deeper. Widower, 2 children, part-time shifts before cleaning contracts. Each fact was a knife of recognition. A memory rose, sharp and clear. She was 12 years old, ready to give up on school after a particularly cruel day. A group of kids had mocked her patched skirt and the way her lunch smelled. She had run behind the oak tree, hiding her face in her hands. It was he who found her. He sat quietly beside her, not speaking at first, just letting her sob. Then when the silence softened, he said, "You can't quit. You're too smart. One day you'll show them all. You'll be the one they look up to." At the time, she hadn't believed him, but those words carried her like a lifeline through years of doubt. She clung to them when scholarship seemed impossible, when university felt like a world too far away. And he had been right. She had become the one people looked up to. And now he was cleaning her floors. Shame washed over her. Shame that she hadn't recognized him immediately. Shame that she had stood silently while others laughed at him. She, who prided herself on fairness, on strength, had hesitated in the face of cruelty. He had once defended her without hesitation, and she had faltered. Her throat tightened as she closed the file. The contrast between their lives was brutal. She had climbed into towers of glass and steel, while he had slipped into shadows unnoticed. Yet the truth gnawed at her. Part of her success had grown from the seed he planted when he told her not to give up. How could she face him now? Questions tumbled through her mind. Did he remember her? Did he still carry the same unshakable kindness? Or had life's weight dimmed his spirit? And why had fate brought him back into her orbit after all these years? She paced her office, heels clicking against the floor. She felt an odd mix of emotions. Shame for letting him endure humiliation without stepping in. Curiosity to know what paths had led him here. Compassion to reach out, to give back some fragment of the encouragement he once gave her. At last, she stopped pacing and stared at the oak-paneled wall behind her desk. A decision crystallized. She could not remain silent any longer. Tomorrow, she would approach him. But this time, she would not approach as a CEO to an employee. She would approach as a girl who once sat beneath an oak tree, hungry and frightened, comforted by the boy who never let her feel small. And for the first time in years, she whispered aloud into the empty office, her voice soft but resolute. "I owe him everything." The hum of clattering trays and low conversations filled the company cafeteria. Employees queued in neat lines, exchanging whispers about deadlines and clients, the way office workers do when they're certain their world is the only one that matters. At the far corner, as always, sat the janitor, lunch pail open, eating quietly, invisible to most. But today, the rhythm broke. High heels clicked against the polished floor, steady and deliberate. Conversations dimmed. Heads turned. The CEO, immaculately dressed in charcoal gray, moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who was never questioned. Yet instead of joining the executives at the glass-lined corner table reserved for her, she veered across the room toward the janitor. Forks froze midair. A paper cup slipped, spilling soda, but no one moved to clean it. All eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding. The janitor looked up in disbelief as her shadow fell across his table. His first thought was that he must have made some mistake, that she had come to reprimand him. But her lips curved, soft and knowing. "Hello, Daniel," she said. His name, not janitor, not sir. His name spoken with warmth that cut through the sterile silence of the room. A ripple of murmurs swept through the cafeteria. Executives who only yesterday laughed at his patched uniform exchanged nervous glances. Interns leaned forward in wide-eyed disbelief. The CEO had not only acknowledged him, she had addressed him as though they shared history. Daniel's throat tightened. For a moment, words failed him. "You remember me?" he finally whispered. Her smile deepened, not performative but genuine. "Of course I do. Do you think I could forget the boy who carved our initials into the old oak tree by the schoolyard?" Gasps echoed through the room. Some chuckled in disbelief, others sat stunned. She wasn't bluffing. The detail was too precise, too intimate. Daniel's hand trembled around his fork. His mind rushed back to afternoons when two children hid from the world beneath a sprawling oak, sketching dreams in the dirt with broken chalk. She had remembered. Despite boardrooms, wealth, and global power, she had carried that piece of childhood with her. "I thought you wouldn't even recognize me," he murmured, overwhelmed. Her eyes softened, a fleeting vulnerability piercing the armor of authority. "I've always recognized you. You just stopped recognizing yourself." The room held its breath. No one dared to move, afraid to shatter the fragile moment. The same employees who mocked him now squirmed in their seats, the weight of their shallow judgments pressing down like lead. Daniel blinked hard, fighting the tide of emotions. To be seen, truly seen, by the most powerful person in the building was more than validation. It was redemption. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the moment ended. She gave a small nod, dignified but tender, and returned to her seat. But the silence did not fade. Whispers swelled like waves, rushing outward, spreading beyond the cafeteria walls. Something had shifted irreversibly. The janitor was no longer invisible. The office was a fortress of glass and steel, perched high above the city. Evening light streamed through the panoramic windows, painting the skyline in gold and violet. From this height, the traffic below looked like nothing more than a shifting mosaic of lights. It was the kind of room where only the most powerful voices were ever heard. And yet, in the middle of it, stood a janitor holding his mop. Daniel shifted awkwardly near the doorway, the polished floors reflecting both his work boots and her designer heels. The contrast was almost cruel. Her leather chair, sleek desk, and the commanding view behind her, set against the humbleness of the man who had spent decades sweeping the remnants of other people's successes. She rose from behind her desk and walked closer. The hardness that employees usually saw on her face was absent now. Instead, her features softened, carrying something far more personal than authority. "Do you know why I asked you here?" she began gently. Daniel shook his head, lowering his eyes. "I can't imagine why. I don't belong in an office like this." Her voice warmed, touched with an emotion rarely heard from her. "You belonged in my life long before this office even existed." The words disarmed him. His grip on the mop loosened, and he slowly raised his gaze. She smiled faintly, as though revisiting a place in her mind. "Do you remember the chalkboard in Mrs. Green's class? The one you always cleaned for me when I was too shy to stay behind?" A laugh escaped Daniel's lips, surprised and nostalgic all at once. "That old chalkboard I thought no one remembered. My hands were always white with dust." "I remembered," she said firmly. "Every single time. You thought it was nothing, but to me, it meant someone was on my side, that someone saw me when the others teased me." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, embarrassed by the weight of her gratitude. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. She shook her head, stepping closer, her tone steady but charged with conviction. "No, Daniel, that's where you're wrong. No one else did. You were the one who stood between me and the bullies. You were the one who told me I was smart when I wanted to disappear. You made me believe I could be more." The janitor's chest tightened. His instinct was to brush it aside, to shrink from the recognition. But her eyes, clear and unwavering, held him there. For the first time in decades, he felt the full gravity of what those small gestures had meant. "You're giving me too much credit," he whispered. "I was just a kid." "And I was just a scared girl," she replied softly. "But the difference is you gave me courage. Do you understand? I would not be standing in this office today if not for those little sparks you lit in me when no one else cared." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the city outside. Daniel's hands trembled slightly on the mop handle, though he didn't notice. His eyes burned with unspoken emotion. For her, the realization settled like a stone in her chest. All the accolades, the contracts, the boardroom victories, each carried traces of him. He had been the invisible hand that steadied her long before the world ever did. She drew in a steady breath, her decision crystallizing. "Daniel," she said at last, her voice low but resolute, "it's time I give back what you gave me, and I know exactly how." The words hung in the air like a promise, the beginning of something larger than either of them could yet name. The company auditorium pulsed with anticipation. Rows of suited employees filled the hall, their murmurs blending into a low hum beneath the glow of the stage lights. It was supposed to be a routine quarterly gathering, numbers, strategies, the usual. But when the CEO stepped to the podium, her expression carried something far more personal. She didn't begin with charts or forecasts. Instead, her voice softened as she glanced across the sea of faces. "Before we talk about our company's future," she said, "I want to tell you a story about my past." A hush fell. Even those who had laughed in the cafeteria leaned forward. She spoke of a small town, of dusty playgrounds, of a little girl who felt invisible. She described the boy who had shared sandwiches, who shielded her from cruel words, who believed in her when no one else did. Her words painted him not as a janitor, but as the quiet hero of her story. Then she paused, letting the silence expand before turning toward the wings of the stage. "That boy," she said, her voice trembling slightly with pride, "is here with us today. And though decades have passed, his kindness has never left me. Please welcome Daniel." Gasps rippled through the hall. From the shadows, the janitor stepped forward slowly, mop set aside, shoulders uncertain. For a moment he seemed out of place, until the CEO's smile anchored him under the spotlight. The room erupted in applause, not polite clapping, but a standing ovation that rose like a wave. Those same employees who had mocked him days before now stood with flushed faces, clapping furiously, some even wiping their eyes. Daniel's cheeks reddened as he reached the podium. He cleared his throat, awkwardly adjusting the microphone. I don't know what to say," he began, his voice steady but humble. "I never expected anything like this. I only ever wanted to work honestly, provide for my family, and do what was right." His words, simple and unadorned, cut deeper than any rehearsed speech. The room fell utterly silent, hanging on his humility. The CEO placed a hand gently on his shoulder, her own eyes glistening. "You did more than work honestly, Daniel. You gave courage when it was needed most. And today, we all honor you, not for what you've lost, but for what you've given." The ovation surged again, thunderous and unrelenting. Daniel bowed his head, overwhelmed, the echo of cafeteria laughter now replaced by the roar of recognition. In that moment, the contrast was cinematic. A man once ridiculed over a plain lunchbox now celebrated in the company's grand hall, his dignity shining brighter than the spotlights above. As applause washed over them, the CEO's gaze swept across the audience. The message was clear, almost tangible. Greatness is not defined by titles or wealth, but by the quiet acts of kindness that ripple through lives. And for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to smile, not with resignation, but with the quiet triumph of a man finally seen. The applause in the auditorium had barely faded when the CEO leaned into the microphone once more. Her voice carried not just authority, but tenderness. "Daniel," she said, turning toward him, "you've spent your life giving quietly, never asking for recognition. Today, I want to do more than honor you. I want to invite you into a role that reflects the leader you've always been." Gasps fluttered through the audience. Daniel blinked, stunned. She continued, her tone firm yet warm. "From this day forward, you will serve as our community mentor and advisor, a position where your wisdom, compassion, and life lessons can guide not just our company, but the people we touch through it. You'll have the resources to support families, to help young people who remind us of who we once were. And of course, this role comes with the stability you and your family deserve." Daniel's lips trembled. His eyes brimmed with tears as the weight of her words sank in. Slowly, he brought a hand to his chest, as if steadying his heart. I don't know what to say," he whispered. "All I ever wanted was to provide for my children. If this helps me do that and lets me give back to others, then I accept with all my heart." The hall erupted again, this time with cheers as well as applause. Some employees clapped while others wiped their eyes, visibly moved by the sight of their CEO and the once mocked janitor standing side by side as equals. But the transformation didn't end on stage. In the days that followed, the atmosphere within the company began to shift. The cafeteria, once a place where laughter was cruelly aimed at the vulnerable, grew into a space of respect. Employees who had looked past janitors, receptionists, and security guards began greeting them by name, offering smiles instead of smirks. Small acts of kindness rippled outward, someone holding a door, another sharing a meal, executives asking about the stories of those they had overlooked. Daniel embraced his new role with humility. He spent afternoons mentoring interns who felt invisible, reminding them of their worth. He visited schools, standing before classrooms of wide-eyed children, telling them that success wasn't measured by money but by kindness and perseverance. His presence became a beacon both inside and outside the company. Meanwhile, his friendship with the CEO deepened again, no longer bound by childhood but renewed in the present. They often shared quiet moments in her office, memories of chalk dust and oak trees mingling with the hum of the city skyline outside. For both of them, it felt like life had come full circle. News outlets soon picked up the story. CEO honors her childhood friend, a janitor who once believed in her. The tale went viral online, spreading across continents. Viewers shared it not as gossip, but as inspiration, a reminder that dignity, once dismissed, could be restored with compassion. And in those echoes, within boardrooms, cafeterias, and living rooms worldwide, the message was unmistakable. One act of recognition can transform not only a life, but an entire culture. The story you have just witnessed is not merely about a janitor and a CEO. It is about us. About the unseen lives that move quietly through our world, the quiet sacrifices that so often go unnoticed, and the power of kindness to echo across decades. True wealth, as this story reminds us, is not found in bank accounts, corner offices, or high-rise titles. True wealth is measured in the kindness that endures, in the courage of one soul to lift another, and in the dignity that cannot be diminished by circumstance. Think of Daniel, the man once laughed at for his worn uniform and plain lunchbox. To some, he was invisible. To others, a target for mockery. But beneath those calloused hands and quiet steps lay a history of sacrifice, a heart that had given far more than it had ever received. He was a father who skipped meals so his children might eat. He was a worker who endured hardship without complaint. And long before that, he was the boy who believed in a little girl's dreams when the world around her offered only doubt. And think of her, the CEO who carried his encouragement through the years like a hidden flame. She built an empire, yes, but more than that, she built a life founded on the belief that someone once told her she could. When she saw him again, mocked and forgotten, she remembered. And in remembering, she chose not to look away. How often do we pass by people like Daniel, the janitor mopping the floor before dawn, the waiter balancing trays for strangers, the driver weaving through traffic to get us home? How many of them carry stories of sacrifice and resilience that we never pause to hear? And how many times in our silence do we allow dignity to be diminished when we could have protected it? The cafeteria scene is one we all know. A place where laughter can be cruel, where judgment is quick, where appearances dictate worth. But what if, instead of mocking, we recognized? What if, instead of dismissing, we dignified? The smallest shift in perspective could ripple outward, reshaping not just a single life, but an entire culture. The lesson is universal. The bonds of kindness are stronger than time, stronger than loss, stronger even than the walls society builds between rich and poor. Childhood bonds can outlast distance. A single act of protection, a sandwich shared, a cruel word deflected, can become the seed of someone's entire future. And here lies the challenge for each of us. Who in your life might be a Daniel, who sits quietly at the edge of the room, carrying untold stories, waiting not for recognition, but for simple respect? Who might you choose to see today, not for their title, not for what they can offer you, but for their humanity? Perhaps it is the colleague you rarely greet, the neighbor who sweeps their stoop each morning, the cashier whose smile masks exhaustion. Each one is a universe of untold battles and unseen strength. Each one deserves to be recognized. Daniel's journey teaches us that dignity does not come from applause or titles. It comes from within, from living honestly and giving quietly. But his story also reminds us of our responsibility to protect that dignity in others, to lift where we can, to recognize the invisible threads that tie us all together. And so, as the story closes, picture this. The cafeteria is no longer filled with laughter at his expense. Instead, it hums with a quiet respect. Daniel walks through it not as a man bowed by mockery, but as someone restored, shoulders lifted, steps firm. His lunchbox is the same, but now, when he sets it down, the room falls into a silence not of scorn, but of reverence. Across the glass walls, sunlight floods the space, refracting into golden shards that touch every table. The CEO watches from her corner, not as a distant figure of power, but as a friend. Grateful, humbled, reminded that the empire she leads was built not on ambition alone, but on the kindness of a boy who once believed in her. And so the image lingers. The janitor walking confidently, the CEO's gaze softened with gratitude, the sunlight filling every shadow. This is the lesson. Greatness is not about climbing higher than others. It is about lifting others with you. It is about remembering that the measure of a life is not in what we own, but in the dignity we protect, the kindness we give, and the people we choose to see. So I leave you with a question. As you step back into your own world, into your own cafeterias, boardrooms, and streets, who might you recognize today? Whose dignity might you protect? What simple act of kindness might ripple farther than you will ever know? Because in the end, wealth fades, titles change, and applause dies down. But kindness endures. And it is that kindness, quiet yet unshakable, that transforms not only lives, but the very world we share.